when I found out that Twitter was breaking the direct links in the DMs to the Hunter Biden laptop story written by the New York Post, I was gobsmacked. I mean, my mouth was actually hanging open when I found out, you cannot actually send this story in your direct messages in Twitter. And that was a directive from the top there. That, I think, started my dark night of the soul, where I sort of realized, wait a minute, this technology policy thing, like, technology is not necessarily neutral, and we can talk about that too. It's not, just a tool, as a lot of the libertarians even today would say. This is something that can be wielded in a very political way. So that kind of raised my antenna. And then the crossing the Rubicon moment for tech policy, I think, in general, and everyone who studies it and gives policy recommendations, was when Parler got axed. That happened. A few days later, I go on TV and I basically say, hey, the real story behind Parler was not, Google, it was not Apple, it was AWS, Amazon Web Services, turning the lights out. It was them revoking their cloud hosting infrastructure. And if you can go all the way at that point to the mid-tier of the digital stack and control and manipulate the flow of information in that regard, that is wildly problematic. And so I realized that I needed to go to a conservative institution to be able to tell the truth about these things. And so I went to the Heritage Foundation.
Howdy, everyone, and welcome back to Moment of Truth, the podcast of American Moment. My name is Saurabh Sharma. I'm the president of American Moment, and I'm joined by
Nick Solheim, the COO of American Moment.
And this is the rare episode where both of us are on at the same time.
You should stop traveling so much.
Well, you should stop spending all the money we raise. I have to go find more of it. Things have been a little bit crazy these past few weeks. If you haven't been following us on Twitter, which you should, at AmMoment.org, there have been some big announcements. First, there was a big profile of us in Politico magazine that you can read. I think it was called something like The Brash Young Conservative Staffing the Next Administration, something like that. It's pretty extensive and pretty fair, all things considered. We highly recommend that you guys check it out. A photographer came and took pictures of Nick and I looking like dorks in the office. It's very entertaining. Take a look at that. And then more importantly and substantively, I was named the executive director of the Edmund Burke Foundation, which puts on National Conservatism Conference as part of a new strategic partnership between American Moment and EBF. And so there's a ton of work associated with that. We are keeping very busy here. We do not slow down. And if that wasn't enough, there's another big thing, which is now we're running our big Fellowship for American Statecraft program year-round. There are applications open right now for a spring Fellowship for American Statecraft. If you want to come to Washington and have it paid for 3 months for you to get your first job in public policy or on Capitol Hill, fill out that form. We're going to be closing the application pretty soon here at the end of November, maybe first week of December. It's really important that you fill it out ASAP. We are putting people in those slots immediately. We will place you in a Senate office, House office, or at a public policy organization and make sure that you can begin your career in earnest here on Capitol Hill.
It's December 3rd at 11:59 p.m.
Something like that.
Yeah.
We had on today one of the most fun episodes we've had in a long time. We had on Kara Frederick, who's the director of tech policy at the Heritage Foundation. Her research focuses on big tech and emerging technology policy. Prior to joining Heritage, she was a fellow for the Technology and National Security Program at the Center for a New American Security, where she concentrated on high-tech illiberalism, data privacy, and digital surveillance. Before that, she was the creator and helped lead Facebook's Global Security Counterterrorism Analysis Program. She was also team lead for Facebook headquarters regional intelligence team in Menlo Park, California. Before that, she was a senior intelligence analyst for U.S. Naval Special Warfare Command and spent 6 years as a counterterrorism analyst at the Department of Defense. While at DoD, she deployed 3 times to Afghanistan in support of Special Operations Forces, served as a briefer to the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations / Low Intensity Conflict, and was a liaison to the National Security Agency. She's been on every show and podcast and news publication under the sun. She's testified before Congress. She's a Marine Corps brat. She received her Master's of Arts degree in War Studies from King's College London and her Bachelor's degree in Foreign Affairs and History from the University of Virginia, where she played Division I soccer. She surveyed the entire landscape of the big tech fight for us right now in a super knowledgeable and winsome way. It was absolutely fantastic. I can't describe it any better than she can, so we'll go straight to Kara Frederick. Kara, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
We always like to hear about how our guests got where they are today. People joke that you're a Fed, you're deep state, you have a very interesting backstory. Why don't you tell us that story and how you ended up where you are today?
Yeah, so was a Fed, not currently. I'm like an anti-Fed now. I like to consider myself. So I wanted to be a soccer star. Never quite made it. Sat a lot of pretty famous benches. So when I played soccer in England in grad school and realized that I had to get a real job because my dad told me I had to. I'm like mid-20s at this point, and I sent a cold email based off of a recommendation to a 3-letter agency, and they got back to me right away and recruited me for their counterterrorism division. So I left grad school in London and went right to the Defense Intelligence Agency. And there we were considered target developers, and within 6 months at least.
What's a target developer?
So what you do is targets are basically terrorists. Mm-hmm. So I was an Al-Qaeda analyst by trade, and our whole job was to find needles in haystacks. And the needles were Al-Qaeda operatives. At this point, if they had any sort of what we would call external operations remit, aka they were targeting the United States and they were members of Al-Qaeda or facilitating that was who we were targeting. And we effectively put scrutiny on these people for kinetic action by an assault force. So within about 6 months, I was in Afghanistan developing targets for special operations units, Rangers, other Army guys, and Navy SEALs, and did 3 deployments to Afghanistan targeting. And that's where I learned to love technology and learned to use technology. I did 2 rotations to the National Security Agency, where we had full permissions of NSA analysts, and we used them to conduct our targeting activities against Al-Qaeda. I also did 2 rotations to the Pentagon. So I was a briefer to the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations and Low Intensity Conflict, ASD SOLIC, as many people on the Hill will recognize. And it was about that time that I started getting recruited by Naval Special Warfare Development Group. And I separated from the Defense Intelligence Agency and went over and worked as a pure targeter, a senior targeter for Naval Special Warfare Development Group in Virginia Beach. I had worked with a girl who at the Pentagon, and she ended up going out to Menlo Park, California, and starting a team working for something called Global Security Intelligence and Investigations at a little company called Facebook. And she needed people who were very aware of how terrorists operated digitally, what their social networks looked like online, and who could track these types of individuals. But instead of doing it for the U.S. government, they were starting to do it for these big corporations like Facebook. So she recruited me. I ended up going out there after a brief stint at Naval Special Warfare Development Group as a permanent Navy civilian. And I helped start and run their counterterrorism analysis program for global security intelligence and investigations. So pretty much.
What year would that have been?
That was in 2016.
Okay.
So recruited in 2015 and eventually went there in the summer of 2016.
Okay.
Which was a very interesting time.
You thought you were going to, go after Al-Qaeda, and then suddenly, deplorables came on the market.
Yeah. Well, and it was, especially if you guys remember in 2014, it was ISIS. That was the guys who were propagating those, slick propaganda videos that everyone talked about, burning Jordanian pilots alive in cages, just being absolutely brutal and letting America and the rest of the Western world see it. The entire world see it. So Facebook, at that point, I believe, I wasn't there yet, but they realized they had a problem. Mm-hmm. They realized, cheerleaders for terrorists on the platform, terrorist propaganda in general, recruitment efforts. This was not something that they could countenance. I like to tell people that big tech companies care first and foremost about three things. That's number one, their bottom line. Number two, growth. And number three, preventing PR fires. Yeah. And this kind of thing would have been a massive PR fire for them. So they were looking into, some government bureaucracies that had long histories of doing this. And recruiting those people, bringing them over to the Bay Area, very expensive, and sort of luring us in. With promises of, making the platform hostile to terrorist actors, democratizing information on the other side too, right? Having communities, doing this new cool thing that was really in the locus of power in the universe, and they were very effective at doing that. And they still do have a lot of very smart, very talented people drawn from these institutions to sort of give what, these big global corporations that still consider themselves scrappy startups, give them a degree of sort of authority and augustness and create, the muscle memory that we were used to creating in the government to do these things.
When did you notice that things started to turn from, was it immediately when you went over there? It was like, oh, there's
I guess just walk us through the timeline. Trump gets elected. What happens?
Yeah. I was actually, so I was on the West Coast. I was still in the office at that time. And I was sort of giving my parents the play-by-play, waking them up on the East Coast, like, this is really going to happen. This is crazy. Obviously, I was alone. I was sitting in what we call the Global Security Operations Center there. So it was sort of like a 24-hour man thing. And it was, we were sitting outside of it. And I was sort of watching all the TVs that were going on. And I was like, this is amazing. This is so great. So I go home, I wake up the next day, and you go in the building, and it was just like a funeral. Yeah. People were devastated. I heard tales of people going into these little conference rooms just to cry, people not being able to come in, people having to leave, that kind of thing. And there was certainly a pall over the organization, I would say. But not just that, but sort of a understanding that they needed to do something, right? These types of people, and I'm not talking about the founders themselves, but people more in sort of those mid-tier management, product manager positions, HR positions, the administrators, I felt as if they were kind of like, okay, so what do we do? It didn't really get very, very bad, I would say, until 2017. So I left in the summer of 2017. And I would say after that, when the Cambridge Analytica scandal broke and the media in general just really started blaming Facebook for Trump's election, everyone wanted obviously to be there and to sort of prevent something like that from happening again. But I don't think that really happened in earnest until I left. Mm-hmm. And having talked to, people who still work there, they do say there is a schism between those who were hired pre-2017 and those who are hired post-2017. And I think that it manifests in people like the Facebook whistleblower, right? When Frances Haugen talked about why she did what she did and why she joined Facebook in the first place, post-Trump election, was for those election integrity efforts, was because she felt like she could redress something that happened, aka a Trump election, that Facebook may or may not have propagated, and the media rendered their verdict. But it's that kind of employee, I think, that really took it to the next level. But it was more sort of sorrow, and then the beginning of resolution when I was at least there in 2017. So I wasn't there for the full flowering, I would say, of what came to pass in the ensuing years and to now. But I did sort of see the seeds of that begin.
What do you think of Frances Haugen?
Personally, she's a very nice woman. We testified together, and she was very kind to me. I do think while we are on complete polar opposites of the political spectrum, I do think what she showed the world was very important. The Facebook files published by the Wall Street Journal in October of 2022, I believe, might have been 2021, but when the Wall Street Journal published the internal research of Facebook, especially when it came to a lot of the harms that are being visited on young people, young women in particular, the fact that they know about it and they're doubling down, I think that's a service. I think Americans need to know that these companies are extremely cognizant of what they're doing to the next generation of citizens, and they keep going. And they want to keep going because it's that, growth, bottom line, that kind of thing. And also, it aligns with a lot of their ideological proclivities. The average person walking through the halls of these Bay Area companies, they are supportive of the transgender movement. They're supportive of all of the, LGBTQ stuff that's proliferating on the platform. And so it doesn't really, I don't think it bothers them as much as it bothers people with our values, that this poison is being pumped into the minds of children. Some do. Some, I would say, on the left are very concerned about this, and we can make common cause, which is a good thing. And especially when it comes to things that are more concrete, like the suicidal ideation that it pushes. 6% of American teenagers say that Instagram has, they can trace their suicidal thoughts directly to that platform. I think everyone should be concerned about such things, and there are people on the left that are very concerned about that as well. But Frances, in revealing that, I think opened a lot of people's eyes to the good.
So tech policy is this interesting thing where it has transitioned from, a department that would exist at a think tank, and, you'd bring in the techie nerds to talk about, the discrete issue, to sort of not having any fences around it. Tech policy undergirds every single policy area. There's a tech angle to immigration, to foreign policy, to culture, to trade, to economics, everything under the sun. When it comes to conservative attention to that issue, that really began in 2017 when Ted Cruz started bringing people to the Senate asking about what was happening when it came to conservative censorship. Walk me through your personal timeline of how the big tech fight has evolved since then, and what the major seasons in it are, and describe the season we're in now.
That's a good question. I think it is demonstrative of how we need to contend with these issues to begin with. So I left Facebook in 2017, and then I went to a bipartisan public policy think tank, the Center for New American Security. I was there for over 3 years. It was wonderful. I was a technology and national security fellow, and COVID happened. So this is 2020. We're all remote. My DuPont Circle apartment became BLMville. So I decamped to Virginia Beach, where my fiance was living at the time, and sort of became very online. And, no more traipsing around Berlin and Rome, going to these fancy parties, giving fancy talks and whatnot. All that ended because of COVID. And so I started to really dig a lot deeper into my profession, and be one of those people, as P.G. Keenan says, whose job is to pay attention to things, to be aware of things. And I realized when this was a big thing in the election of 2020, when I found out that Twitter was breaking the direct links in the DMs to the Hunter Biden laptop story written by the New York Post. I was gobsmacked. I mean, my mouth was actually hanging open when I found out, oh, you cannot actually send this story in your direct messages in Twitter. And that was a directive from the top there. If you, Dorsey or Vijaya, whoever you think who actually made that call, Yoel as well had some interest in that, I believe, as well, Roth. That I think started my dark night of the soul, where I sort of realized, wait a minute, this technology policy thing, like technology is not necessarily neutral, and we can talk about that too. It's not, just a tool, as a lot of the libertarians even today would say. This is something that can be wielded in a very political way. So that kind of raised my antenna. And then the crossing the Rubicon moment for tech policy, I think, in general, and everyone who studies it and gives policy recommendations, was when Parler got axed. So that happened. A few days later, I go on TV and I basically say, hey, the real story behind Parler was not, Google, it was not Apple, it was AWS, Amazon Web Services, turning the lights out. It was them revoking their cloud hosting infrastructure. And if you can go all the way at that point to the mid-tier of the digital stack and control and manipulate the flow of information in that regard, that is wildly problematic. And so I realized that I needed to go to a conservative institution to be able to tell the truth about these things. And so I went to the Heritage Foundation, which, at the time had sort of a, very solid analysis, but I don't think they had fully wrapped their arms around this problem. And what I wanted to do was study it and then expose it, sound the alarm, and then hopefully help try to change policy. So we write this massive paper in February 2022 called Combating Big Tech's Totalitarianism, a Roadmap. And it makes a lot of waves, and it's sort of our coming out party in terms of, hey, like, we're going to take the fight to these guys because the confluence of evidence indicates that they have a political perspective. They are manipulating and controlling the flow of information. They don't trust Americans to, believe their own eyes and their own ears and to make their own assessments. And we need to fix this. And the government has a role in doing so, because, that is why the government exists, right? To help their citizens, for the security of their citizens, and to help us self-govern. And this was the exact opposite of self-governance, and it was running amok. It is still running amok. And I think the utility of, my being here and talking to you guys is to say all of those old libertarian platitudes, the bromides, the private companies are sacrosanct and whatnot. If you can't see what is actually happening right now, from even just start in 2020 and move to 2023, then your head is in the sand. It's willful at that point, and you need to update your software, as my friend David Boy says, because it is a massive issue. As I've said before, it is a 5-alarm fire. The next generation of citizens is being sacrificed on the altar of these tech companies, some of them beholden to the Chinese Communist Party, our foremost adversary. So it needs to be fixed now, and the government can help.
So there's a bunch of different buckets of issues that tech policy falls under. There's the censorship issue, there's the security issue, there's privacy, there's the social consequences that it causes. Let's just take each of them piece by piece, starting with the social consequences. You mentioned earlier that it's very clear that these tech companies know the effect that social media has on especially young people. How do you think about the question of how technology interacts with the cultural fabric of the United States, and what should the goal of public policy in rectifying that be?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely eroding the cultural fabric of the United States. We see that with TikTok, and we could sort of table that and talk about the broader landscape of this thing. What I like to say is now we actually have studies that reify a causal relationship between habitual social media use among children, especially at certain periods of their life, in adolescence mostly, or pre-adolescence, and their decrease in life satisfaction. So you have a lot of people saying, oh, correlation does not equal causation and things like that. But no, we have the studies now. Like, we have the data that actually says Cambridge University came out and they said there's an inverse relationship between, especially females at certain sensitive periods of their adolescent life, they decrease, their life satisfaction decreases in relation to the amount of the increased social media use. So that's one thing. And then you have a University of North Carolina study saying that this is rewiring the brains of children. Habitual social media checking behaviors changes the way children as young as 12 years old respond to rewards and punishment socially. So it is rewiring, and these are neuroscientists, by the way, from the University of North Carolina. They're saying, yeah, if your kid uses social media, even as young as 12 years old, their brains are literally being rewired. So that's a backdrop. And then you look at things like TikTok, where we know this is a platform that's beholden to the Chinese Communist Party by virtue of their parent company, ByteDance, which is subject to the laws and policies of the PRC, the People's Republic of China. They have laws like the 2017 National Intelligence Law that effectively makes any private company work in the service of the state. So you have the TikTok CEO in March of 2023 going up to Congress and saying things like, oh, U.S. user data is not stored in China. The Chinese engineers are not accessing American data. We know that's false. We know from BuzzFeed, RIP, and Forbes reporting that this has been happening over and over again, that Chinese engineers have accessed American data, that ByteDance engineers and personnel were even using TikTok to try to locate via IP addresses the whereabouts and location of American journalists. So they were using it as the targeting app that it is. In terms of, so that's right, one thing.
Of course, most of our journalists are using TikTok.
Yeah, of course, of course. Yeah. Well, and then what is this platform pumping? We've seen in the past few weeks the fact that pro-Hamas content is proliferating on this platform in particular. We've seen in the past few weeks Osama bin Laden apologists and young children trying to rehabilitate his image. It's not a coincidence that this is actually happening on TikTok. We know that they can manually amplify stories. They have a heating button that they do this. This has also come out from whistleblowers and whatnot. So this is a platform that is capable of and has been actively manipulated by our enemy. Chinese state media accounts on TikTok were insulting conservative candidates in the midterms of 2022 and favoring Democratic candidates. So they were actually, these are malign foreign influence actors meddling in our elections. We heard a lot about that. This is actually happening, right? This is actually happening, and TikTok is doing it, and yet we're sitting on our hands. The Biden administration is sitting on their hands. States are moving out, which is great, but a lot of Montana, first state to ban the use of TikTok on personal devices, but it's being tied up in court by industry groups, libertarian groups, taking money from the CCP. Massive issue.
So there are, I think, two different issues relating to the social fabric question. There's the kinds of content that you allow, whether that be like porn on Twitter or pro-Hamas stuff on TikTok, whatever. And then there's like the dopamine question, right? The issue of, young people being really addicted to this stuff where it's actually detrimental to their health, not just mentally, but I think physically as well. What do you propose, or how do you propose conservatives think about that issue?
Yeah, I think you think about it in buckets. At the Tech Policy Center in the Heritage Foundation, we start with the first bucket, and this is the impact of social media, TikTok too, on the next generation of citizens. And I've talked about this a lot too. We don't really talk about what this is doing to the souls of our kids. I think that's really critical. Somebody like me who comes from the national security world, hearing something like that is very squishy, but we've all seen the effects right now. Like you see, even my daughter, she's barely 1 year old. And when she looks at my phone, she changes. She becomes a different person. She lights up, in a bad way, right? And she becomes just monomaniacal about that device. And it takes her a little while to like, we try not to give it to her. Sometimes she grabs it and I'm like, ugh. But it takes her a while to come down from that. And, instead of reading like books, things that are enriching, things that actually build up your moral fabric, that is something that's a warning sign. We know, given what, American teenagers, especially, again, I'm a female, so I identify with, what the younger girls are going through. We had a banned TikTok press conference on the Hill. We had young girls come and they made signs and they said, TikTok stole my innocence. And it's the things that they're seeing, the images that are passing in front of their eyes, that has a corrosive effect on these young girls' souls. Gender dysphoria, the suicidal ideation, the eating disorder content. A lot of enterprising journalists, some at the New York Post, have done experiments in the UK as well. And they register as 13 or 14-year-old girls, and then they report on what type of content is served to them within minutes. And within 5 to 8 minutes, they've got gender dysphoria, suicidal ideation, eating disorder content. In a Wall Street interview, a teenager described it as a veritable onslaught of this type of content. And again, it's degrading and eroding the souls of our young women, the ones who, we want to preserve this republic going forward. And I think you see the vestiges right now. You see Osama bin Laden was right. Yeah, let's deconstruct Christianity. And I will tell you, the Chinese Communist Party is more than happy to see America destroyed from within by the youth and the poison that they're imbibing from certain platforms.
Yeah, I suppose more what I'm asking is, how should conservatives think about a sort of government solution to this? Is it platforms aren't allowed to have this kind of content? Is it some people have proposed, not allowing like endless scroll? How do you think about those sorts of regulations?
Yeah, I think there's a couple ways. You start at the basics. So first, you ban TikTok at the federal level. Okay, we'll take care of that. That's good to go. There's so many national security justifications as well that feeds into it. Then you look at other social media platforms. We need age verification. And tech companies can do it. They have the programmers, they have the capabilities. There are technical ways to do this. They can do it.
I bought a cigar from Michael Knowles and it asked me to fill out it took my driver's license and it knew what age I was. It was pretty easy.
Yeah, it's a thing.
Yeah.
It's a thing that happens. These are some of the most brilliant minds. And there are organizations that, we really like putting out very good roadmaps for this kind of thing.
Oh, but don't you understand? It's expensive.
Oh my gosh!
It's gonna erode my bottom line.
Good. And that's the thing. And this is Justice Thomas has said as much. He was referring specifically to Section 230 and Section 230 reform, but he said something to the effect of platforms they've gotten all the benefits of, in this particular instance, that statute, but none of the responsibility. And that's the thing. They have undertaken none of the responsibility. And at this point, the verdict is in. So take some responsibility. And frankly, the role of government is in being that stick now, because we've given them so many years to try to do this. Okay, we will, promises, or obfuscation when they're sitting in front of the senators and House members on the dais, technical dolphin speak, try to get out of it. But now there's absolutely no excuse. The technology exists to do this. You have the best programmers at your disposal. You know the effects that it's having on children. It's time to act now. Because they have an act, all right, let's get something in there like the Kids Online Safety Act. Let's get something in there like these draft proposals, Protecting Children Online, Kids Online Acts. Those things have been bandied about. We are helping work on a lot of those drafts. There's absolutely no excuse at this point for the government not to wield its power to help the next generation.
When you say age verification, just brass tacks, can't access social media before what age?
Do you want my personal opinion or do you want my think tank's opinion?
Your personal opinion.
No, I think as old as possible, as old as we can go. Speaking as Kara Frederick, not necessarily in our one voice policy at the Heritage Foundation, we haven't articulated a specific age yet. It is my belief that the longer you can keep kids off social media, the better. And I do not have an issue with the government holding a stick or a carrot in some regard when it comes to these things. Because again, social media companies have shown that even if they say they care, they don't care. And they're actively making platforms to target and maximize engagement and users at a younger and younger level. And that is the problem. When Frances Haugen, again, issues these whistleblower docs or, leaks them, and what they're doing is they're creating a team to try to draw in preteens, 9 to 11-year-olds, how to get them to use the product more, creating entire teams to do this, creating products to do this. To me, that's reprehensible. We know, and on the heels of that internal research that says, 1 in 3 women, if they have body image issues, they feel worse when they go on these platforms. The suicidal ideation thing, 6%, we know, but we're going to make something for younger and younger kids. And we'll call it, I like to make this comparison, like a safe injection site, right? So they're going to do drugs anyway. Little kids are going to use phones and use social media anyway. We'll give them this little safe injection site where they can do it on our platform, our little Instagram for preteen platform. Absolutely not. It is all bad for when it comes to children and social media. There's no real right answer. So you start with the basics, and you have an age verification limit. The higher the better, in my estimation.
So moving on to another bucket of broad concerns that undergird the tech issue, privacy. This was an issue that sort of precedes the modern big tech fights. You even had some, libertarians that were somewhat good on this back in the day, though, when it came to government intrusion of personal privacy.
They get too much money to oppose that now.
Right. So how should we be thinking about the invasiveness, the kind of information that tech companies are able to collect on people, the really arresting story that's always been really troubling to me is, Amazon's able to tell that women are pregnant before they know, based on the data mining. How do we think about a new framework for thinking about data privacy in this modern age of the internet?
Yeah, so I'll take a page from my old boss's book. Mark Zuckerberg was always very interested in the technical fixes and the technical solution. He thinks like a programmer, like an engineer. I think there's a lot of merit to that in this space in particular. So I tend to go to the technical solutions here when it comes to privacy. And that's in privacy preserving technologies, privacy enhancing technologies, going to be even more important when it comes to AI. When you look at things like differential privacy and federated models of machine learning, there are ways to build in privacy into technology by design. We call it generally privacy by design. So having standards, NIST, actually, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, actually has some good frameworks here for privacy enhancing and privacy preserving technologies. So build with privacy in mind, lead in privacy, make your product the most private and secure in terms of in a technical sense, and you will draw Americans and I think generally the rest of the world to yourself. So what that would look like in a technical sense is if you have you have a bunch of data, right? You can anonymize aspects of the data so that you're not really getting personally identifiable information. You can make inferences, you can see sort of generally what these patterns are, but you don't necessarily get after the personal, the PII, the sensitive data of an individual so that you can identify them through there. So if you want to do something like Google did it in COVID, not advocating for this, but this is how it sort of works in practice. If people are sort of like checking in towards exposure and whatnot, Google wouldn't exactly know who it was or identifying characteristics of that specific individual, but they would be able to get specific, or they would be able to get a general idea of where those people were going and things like that. So that is avoiding having your data go back to sort of a central data repository where it can easily be exploited or identify individuals. So there are technical ways to do this, and if you just design with privacy in mind, that's a great thing. A lot of approaches to machine learning can do this. So you start there when it comes to privacy.
Apple really sells itself on being the industry leader in this. Is it true? Are they actually leaders in privacy? Are they a gold standard? Is there a level beyond them that we should be aiming towards?
They're not the gold standard. I mean, again, they'll sell them selves as such. I look at the San Bernardino 2015 terrorist attacks in California. Do you guys remember those?
Yeah.
Where they refused to give the FBI any sort of information about the terrorists, and ended up being cracked later by an external actor, but they are more than happy to give that information in other instances where, say, the propagator of alleged terrorist incidents is not a Islamic extremist. So I think they're doing it for optics. They're doing it to pretend that this is something that they're the best at. Obviously, they are so far in bed with China that you can't even think that they'll resist attempts for authoritarian governments to provide that information. Tim Cook was just in San Francisco at the dinner. So I don't think they're the gold standard when it comes to privacy.
Even on the technical side?
There are some things that they do that are good, but they tend to be convenient for Apple's bottom line, such as sort of the walled garden, like Steve Jobs' whole idea of, all of their products are sort of sealed away. The side loading thing, which I know a lot of our friends can talk in more detail about. But no, I think there are better ways to do it, ways that aren't beholden to the Chinese Communist Party, and ways that aren't necessarily beholden to a leftist framework when it comes to, foreign Islamist terrorists visiting their attacks on the American people. Are
there any libertarians, whether it's groups or members, that are particularly good on the privacy issue now?
The Electronic Frontier Foundation has been pretty good. There are some things that we would disagree with, so hit or miss, but they tend to be I would say historically pretty good and now decent. Here's my bugaboo with the libertarian organizations now. Their moment to shine was COVID. They had every opening to roar and be as ferocious as they are against real conservative organizations like us when it comes to the government actually, putting the boot on the neck of Americans, be it the COVID vaccine, be it, some of these, sort of technical COVID measures that a lot of universities were saying that they were going to stand up.
Instead, they just edited the dictionary definition of what being a good libertarian is, and it's except when the government says that there's a flu.
Exactly. Yeah, they folded like sheep suits, more than most groups, that I was aware of. And where were they? Where were they when this happened? Maybe some people gave anemic protests and whatnot, but they have come out more vociferously against an organization like mine and me in particular. Personal invectives have flown, and because of we are trying to actually hold big tech accountable. I have never seen them get as excited as they have when they are, sitting on a dais next to me from the Heritage Foundation when I'm going after big tech. That really lights a fire under them. Not the COVID vaccine mandates, et cetera, et cetera. So my appreciation for the libertarian bent. I would have called myself a libertarian 5 years ago, by the way. My appreciation for the libertarian bent receded considerably when they lacked the courage to be fighters for the American people and self-governance during the COVID vaccine and the pandemic in general.
That's very fair. The next bucket of issues is security. We've mentioned the TikTok conversation. I do want to talk a little bit more about that later. But cybersecurity, especially domestically, but also internationally, is an issue that's growing. It's clearly the sort of a new dimension where warfare will occur. What do you think the American government needs to do in order to level up how seriously it takes a security question, both on the offensive side and on the defensive side?
Yeah, that's a good question, but I do want to preface it by discussing, something that is talked about a lot in our circles, and that is the fact that there are legitimate security concerns, not just cybersecurity, but security concerns, terrorist concerns, drug trafficking, human trafficking, immigration, coyote advertisement concerns for these platforms. There are truly legitimate reasons for types of surveillance to exist, for these tools to be created and used. I helped create some when I was at Facebook to combat foreign Islamist extremism. But we've unfortunately seen a trend in the past few years of turning those tools inward on, frankly, American conservatives. This inflation of the definition of domestic extremism to pretty much just encompass dissident narratives, narratives that go against the line that's being parroted by the Democratic Party and Democrats today, and people on the left. So I think that needs to be said first and foremost. There are legitimate reasons to have these security tools and whatnot, but also it's a big, big problem when you have entire essays written about counterterrorism efforts on these platforms that say, yes, we deliberately intended to redress what we see as a bias toward Islamist extremism at the expense of domestic extremism, which we all know is interpreted as conservative thought.
One of which is about, beheading toddlers. The other is about, voting for Donald Trump.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you look, and this is now like ingrained in the fabric of our institutions that were ostensibly, force multipliers in this fight. So like the DHS February 7th counterterrorism advisory bulletin that said, the people that are posting COVID, quote unquote, misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, that is tantamount to terrorist activity. These actors are creating an atmosphere that can lead to domestic terror attacks. When we know that people on TikTok are actually saying, no, terrorism is great. And that's good and fine. Heck, the Biden administration is considering today, this very day, getting its own TikTok account. So that is, I think, very, very important. A cognition of that is very important for most individuals to be aware of when we talk about security and cybersecurity. Cybersecurity, we know, given, ransomware and all that, has become a bigger and bigger problem. I am an advocate of the 2017 Cybersecurity Command Vision, Cyber Command Vision, which basically said tactical friction is a good thing. And that means there's more of an offensive remit against foreign actors. And I have to always be very, very careful to say malign foreign actors' influence, because otherwise it's, okay, who are the real terrorists? Who does the Biden administration think are real terrorists? TLM goers in the Richmond Diocese and parents at school board meetings, things like that. So when legitimate terrorism exists, people who actually do want to visit harm on American citizens, especially from the outside, this was my bag, again, in the government, that is a thing, then we take the fight to those actors. And there have been some really interesting operations that have been publicized attempting to do that. We are not typically very good at this kind of thing, especially in the information environment. So I would definitely urge caution if, a bureaucrat is listening to this and they're like, oh, I'm going to start my own propaganda campaign against, Hamas, that kind of thing. But I do think tactical friction is a good policy recommendation when it comes to cybersecurity and those issues. But again, if you build these technologies and these products privacy by design, then you are saving yourself a world of hurt, a lot of retroactive policies that are being creative. You're saving yourself a world of hurt, and you're frankly protecting the dissidents among us in a lot of ways. So I think there's a balance to be had between sort of those two considerations, and finding it is, part of our job, and we have to communicate that to people on the Hill.
In hostile foreign powers, China, North Korea, Iran, and several other countries, there is a sense, at least that's been communicated to me, that the most talented programmers and hackers in those countries end up being part of the offensive cybersecurity capabilities of those countries' militaries. And in our country, the most talented programmers go on to big tech companies. And so do we have a sort of systematic disadvantage when it comes to the talent of our cyber military, to use a completely made up colloquial term, when it comes to combating these foreign threats?
Yeah, I would say so. And there have been a lot of efforts, especially starting in 2017, moving forward to try to fix that. Jury's still out on whether or not those have succeeded. But I've always been an advocate for creating some sort of on-ramp, off-ramp, in the words of Nate Fick, who runs a big cyber portfolio in the government right now, former Marine, to allow people to sort of get a taste of government, get a taste of the private sector, and then go back in to the government. Obviously, things have been a little different in the past few years, and working for the government and the way that it treats conservatives. But generally, I think it's a good thing for people to get experience in both sectors, public and private, if they can. But the private sector, I think, obviously is going to be very alluring given the resources that they have. We saw, in fact, pretty much when I was there, and then going forward, we saw a drastic improvement, I think, in the capabilities of our threat intel analysts and in the private sector, vice the public sector, because they have a lot of the regional expertise, the language capabilities, the fact that you can create these internal tools, soup to nuts, in like a week is insane in the private sector. That never happened in the government. Mm-hmm. You want something done in the government, it's the adages are all correct. Everyone's so sclerotic. Nobody really cares because they're never really held accountable. They're just punching a clock. I like to call it a welfare system for mediocrities because they're not held to account. And it's funny, when I was getting out, I got out as a GS-13, pretty high step level within that category. And the woman who was checking me out, she was like, "What are you doing? Like, you're crazy. You're in your I think at the time I probably just turned 30, and she was like, "You're insane. Like, you'll be making like bank." I was already making a decent amount of money, and nobody asked too much of you. And I was like, that's the problem. Like, any hard charger, any high performer, like it's a tenure-based system. The person who was sitting next to me in the Pentagon, he would clock in, clock out, like read his newspaper, that's because nobody was going to hold him and no one was going to fire him. And that is a massive problem. I don't need to tell you guys about that issue, but it's very real. And people are there's the 1% of individuals who are the hard chargers doing most of the work, and then the rest are just kind of like hanging out, collecting a paycheck, banking the years so they could get their next step boost. So big problem. And then when you go to a private organization, I go to Facebook, within 6 months, I'm getting 5-figure bonuses because of performance. Like, that's insane. And in the government, it wouldn't have happened. And I was, doing everybody else's work, the geriatric, next to me's work, because again, like I wanted to do it, and that's how the system operates, and that's not tenable, and that is why we're having the problems that we're having.
Hopefully he's not listening to this show.
He's a good dude. He knows. That's the thing. He knows.
So the final bucket that I think is worth paying specific attention to is the issue of political censorship. And, I have right-wing friends that sometimes get frustrated at the attention that is paid to these other buckets of issues, like social consequences, privacy, security, because they feel like the reason that there is right-wing energy and attention on this issue is political censorship, and as many resources need to be devoted to focusing on that problem as possible. And I basically agree with them. I think that we can do lots of things at the same time, but political censorship is a great way to make it so that we never get to do any of the stuff we want to do on policy on every other issue, because we can never win elections. Where does the landscape of political censorship through technology stand today? How is it different than it was 5 or 6 years ago, and what needs to be done? This is the point at which someone says Section 230 and I need to shoot myself in the head, but I guess we might have to talk about that.
We'll try to skip the surface of that a little bit. But I will quote your board member, Rachel Bovard, and our new Heritage Visiting Fellow, Mark Meter. And it's worth saying that a lot of these censorship issues are downstream of the consolidation of power that these big tech companies have been able to amass with their anti-competitive behaviors and practices. So I think that does need to be said, because you can't understand conservative censorship without understanding how they're able to do this. And we can get into sort of the antitrust stuff if you want later. You should actually, I think you've had Mark Meter on.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Literally the second it was legal for me to do so, as soon as he left the Lee office. Yeah.
All right. Well, he's got the blue bell next to his name now. So that's amazing. A good get. So he explained those issues very well. And the censorship state of affairs right now is, you look at something like the NC State study, which they looked at Gmail and spam, like what in the 2022 midterms, like what is going to your spam folders vice what is actually sitting in your inbox when these candidate emails are sent. And they found that most conservative candidate emails right to the spam folders through the spam filter, and most Democrat candidate emails went into people's inboxes. The Google is contesting this. The researchers had a big spotlight on them afterwards and were like, "Oh, I don't know if we did this," but their research holds true. This is happening at that level. And email delivery services, I think, are just a small tip of the iceberg. I alluded to this early on, but when you look at the entire digital stack, so you have your application layer sitting at the top, you have cloud hosting services sitting at the middle, and then the foundation layers of the stack are like internet service providers and whatnot. Now, big tech companies can control every layer of the digital stack. So it's not just censorship and content moderation and the Section 230 issues. It's actually the flow of information. It can be cut off. It can be lights out for entire companies if certain mid-tier layers of the stack are targeted by companies that wield them, or you can get to the lower levels, and that's when we can talk about payment processing. We've seen, especially in Canada, right, like actual people could not withdraw money because money's digital and because they had the wrong political opinions according to the Trudeau government. Fundraising platforms. Like, as life takes on more and more digital characteristics, you will be segmented, you will be cut off, you will be unable to perform the regular duties of life and be a citizen of the United States now because everything is so digital and because of censorship. That is what I think people need to understand. It's not just a content issue. It's not just a free speech issue. It's a doing life issue. And tech companies, because this is so transformational, because this is so different and so new. A lot of people, especially libertarians, will say that's not true. The printing press and this is the fight of our time. Mm-hmm. I think people are starting to realize that as moving among people in general becomes increasingly digitized. So you want to be in the segment of the population that gets to do things, or do you want to be in, the gulag, not just the digital one? And tech companies are able to make you have to have a choice at this point.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And so it's worth spending some specific time. We went through all of these different buckets of technological issues and how they intersect with public policy. All of this just had gasoline poured on it with what felt like the all of a sudden emergence of AI. Now you and I both know that that's not quite as simple as being all of a sudden, but it does have renewed attention and centrality in the imagination of everyday Americans. How should conservatives be thinking about AI? This is really a moment very poorly suited to like bow tie nerds who don't understand how technology works. And so someone who actually has a technical mind, please tell us how we should think about all this.
Yeah, so back in 2018, I was a researcher on the Center for New American Security's AI task force, and we brought a lot of the leading minds on this together. Carnegie Mellon, Andrew Moore. We had OpenAI representatives there. We had DeepMind co-founder there as well. So we've been thinking about this for a few years now. And when I think of how conservatives should start to contend with this problem, I think there's one thing that is often missed, and it's very aligned with our views at the Heritage Foundation on big tech. And a lot of the monopolistic practices of these big tech companies, regulatory capture, etc., that is applicable to AI as well. Mm-hmm. So AI, you get more accurate outputs from your machine if you say throw a bunch of GPUs at the problem, if you have a lot of compute power, if you have a high volume and variety of data that you can train machines on, and you can refine your algorithms, and you just get, I'll say, better AI for sort of the broad strokes version of this. And a lot of those advantages are naturally accruing to these big tech companies. Mm-hmm. Google's been pilfering our data for decades now, that kind of thing. So they are looking to cement these advantages by these, overly strict sort of licensing, certification, that kind of thing. Guardrails are great. I've been an advocate for guardrails for a very long time. However, when these companies clearly have a dog in the fight, and that is preventing the open source community and preventing open sourcing a lot of these foundation models, I think conservatives need to think about that very seriously. And frankly, this is something where the libertarians and they should maybe get on board to this too, because competition, Rachel says a lot, like a genuine free market is not what these big tech companies are doing with their anti-competitive practices. And we have a litany of those to talk about, but they're effectively trying to do the same thing with AI. So conservatives should first and foremost be on guard against that. Conservatives need to think about China. When Biden says we need to cooperate with some of our competitors on AI, does China ever want to cooperate us to our own benefit? No, they always want to pull the wool over our eyes for their own benefit. So we should go in with our eyes wide open. They've been very active in a lot of these international standards bodies where AI-driven technologies like facial recognition, where how that technology is used throughout the world is determined. So we should get involved and active in those bodies as well, and have a affirmative, alternative, US-based version of AI-driven technology use throughout the globe. So I think those are three things conservatives can think of sort of right off the bat. I know this is very contentious. Sam will argue with me, but in terms of open sourcing a lot of the foundation models, I still think the best products come from these communities. And if you have an industry standard that can be worked on by all of these people who are, identifying potential malicious uses and just building better products in general, certain foundation models should be open sourced.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the biggest risks for misuse, or how it could affect the American consumer?
Yeah. Well, you've seen the deep fakes, synthetic media. So that's very popular. It's sexy. It kind of plays well right now. That's a big thing. What I think is really interesting, to combine your previous question about cybersecurity, there was a situation after Soleimani was killed where Trump did a good thing. And an official Kuwaiti account was hacked, and it was basically saying that U.S. troops were pulling out of the region, and it caused people to be like, oh no, we're not going to have our security, that kind of thing. I'm very concerned about the combination of cybersecurity, so hard hacking operations, and then using some sort of AI generated piece of information or narrative to start to cause people to panic. So it would look like, remember the Pentagon explosion? There was generative AI, that kind of thing. So hacking an official account.
The stock market dropped a couple bips.
That happened, years ago. Same thing, so it's that combination, I think, of those sort of, that operation, and then using generative AI, that's a big thing. Obviously, the whole value proposition of artificial intelligence right now in the information environment is that tailored aspect. So they can be very tailored vectors of propaganda, that bespoke propaganda, because your digital profile is much more easy to identify using a lot of these AI tools. And then you can get served perfectly tailored propaganda to you that can shape your behavior at scale. So not just like you as an individual, but this is happening again and again and again. There are all sorts of ways to make spear phishing attacks much more efficient through AI as well.
What's that?
So it's like a phishing attack. Mm-hmm. So based off of social engineering. So you're on your computer, and everyone has probably been phished at some point, but you can automate that with AI, and you can actually tailor these attacks given digital profiles of individuals. That is a big thing. But AI can also, some of the synthetic media detection software, that kind of thing. So it's sort of like a cat and mouse game with AI at the center too. But I think that synthetic media and the focused, tailored propaganda that could shape behavior, especially during an election season, that's going to be the thing that rises to the forefront of people's consciousnesses when it comes to AI.
One element of the AI conversation that is sort of central to how I think about it and how American Moment thinks about it is that technological advancement is good, and it is precisely through the process of building regulatory moats around the incumbents, like the Biden administration is doing right now, that the best or the best version of the benefits of technological advancement can get curtailed. Walk me through how you're thinking about that. Like, what are the good things that could emerge from AI technological progress that won't if we allow the sort of left-wing approach to regulation to reign supreme?
Yeah, I think it comes back to the open sourcing, the foundation models too. So what OpenAI did that was really interesting. So in 2019, they released GPT-2, and they released elements of the model to the open source community. They open sourced it, as we say it with a verb, and they allowed people to potentially identify some of those malicious uses that people who don't want to open source these technologies warn about. So that was a good thing. We recommended actually at CNAS that they do that. And so we thought, okay, you let the community work on this, and then you identify a lot of the problems at the outset that, again, you don't have to go, make new laws to contend with this in the future. So something like that is a really good thing. I think there are ways to create safeguards, and you can do that in ways through the open source community. Yes, you have a small percentage of people who can take these applications and do very bad things with them in the open source community. I understand that. I acknowledge that. But I think in this case, the good will outweigh the bad. So that's kind of comes back to how we're thinking about it. The models of machine learning, approaches to machine learning that have privacy built in, like federated models of machine learning we talked about before, where you're sort of protecting that individual data that's personally identifiable. I think that's one way of going about it. If you want to push these companies to do that at the outset, that's also a good thing as well. What was the last thing that you asked?
Oh, just like where you think the upside is. What should conservatives be excited for?
Oh, AI? Great. Yeah. Okay. So this is actually, somebody who every time I walked into my office at the Pentagon, they would say, "Oh, here's doom and gloom." As an Intel analyst, I'm like, okay, here are the ridgeline threats and risks. So my mind naturally goes that way. But when I'm thinking about the promise of these technologies, I think a lot of that exists in a combination of sort of using what humans are good at and then using what machines are good at. Mm-hmm. So a really good, clear, I think, example of this is a computer vision algorithm that Google built on a contract with the Pentagon, Project Maven. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this. Mm-hmm. But what it would do is it would eliminate, this is a good thing in this instance, the analytical rigor, which is not high, necessary for full motion video analysts to identify things in the field like here's a motorcycle, here's a truck, here's a tree, here's a rock. So the way that it looked when I was in the field is you had a whole row of full motion video analysts, like people who had their meals delivered to them and, they were just staring at screens trying to label and identify what our specific footage from the drone should be characterized at. If a computer can do that, computers are better at doing that kind of thing than human beings are. They are built for that sort of thing, to parse through that sort of, big data, and provided the computer vision algorithms are good, then that eliminates the need for these full motion video analysts to just sit there in a mind-numbing way, eating their lunch out of their, their tins and say, here's a rock, here's a tree, that kind of thing. Yeah. Instead, you can reserve that analytical rigor for something that requires more all source analysis, something like that. So that's the promise, because what are machines good at that better than humans? They're good at parsing through lots of data, again, that high volume and variety of data, and identifying patterns, detecting anomalies. So using machines to do what I say machines do best, and then reserving human beings to allow humans to do what they do best, I think that is part of the promise. And it's that combination of the human intelligence and machine intelligence that can work to frankly fight our wars better, which I do think is still necessary in some instances. We've gone a little overboard, as you guys know, I think that. But in the commercial space too, it's sort of the same thing. If you have a ton of data, you need it analyzed, you need an anomaly detected, you need a pattern to be recognized. Machines are really, really good at that. And then human beings can do the more sophisticated brain work. So it's in the combination, I think, that offers the most promise.
It's good optimism. Now I'm going to ask you to do doom and gloom again.
Perfect.
When someone has deep subject area expertise that has kind of arrived to new political salience, I always like to ask them this question, which is, what is the thing that you're terrified about that no one has on their radar right now, that in 10 years, everyone's going to be Johnny come lately to that issue, but is just now, dancing at the edge of your imagination and you're worried, we're not paying enough prophylactic attention to?
So I think there are two things, one very specific and one more general. I'll start with the general thing first. I'm worried about just the flattening of information. If you look at our children, it's the next generation of citizens, not just because I'm a new mom and everything like that, but I think about this now much differently than I did when I didn't have a daughter. And you look at things like large language models, GPT-4 and whatnot, the information that people are getting is so truncated that, we are not able to be the critical thinkers that we're supposed to be and filtering all the information from ourselves and then coming up and refining our own arguments, because a lot of it's being made for us. All of the trust and safety layer, as David Sachs talks about, that is being coded and programmed by, the people in Silicon Valley who don't necessarily think like the three of us here. And it is filtering out and, filtering in information that this large language model is processing. And that is the thing that our kids see. So it's sort of it's not just at this point, it's not just the control of the flow of information, but it is the control of the information itself that's absolutely critical for the next generation. And it's going to be, they're going to be severely disadvantaged if we want, I think, America to exist in the way that I'm a lot older than you guys, but the way that I grew up in, which I think, in the end, I tell my husband this all the time, that America's gone. That America's gone. But if we want some remnant, maybe how you guys grew up, then we have to get our hands around the AI thing very quickly. So that's the general thing. The specific thing, and I wrote about this in our February 2022 paper, is Apple was toying with the idea of basically surveilling your phone at the device level, and they were doing it under the auspices of CSAM, child sexual abuse material, and preventing, CSAM. So what their proposal said was that they could go through, say, your iPhotos, I think that's what they're just calling Apple, and make a determination like, oh, is this, nudity and that kind of thing, and at device level surveil your phone. That is a massive issue. That is like, okay, oh, you don't want somebody to, extrapolating out. You don't want someone to read this specific thing. Okay, you're not, that can't even be downloaded on your phone at all. So that to me too is, okay, if you have things happening at device level, and I write about this a lot more in the paper, if you guys want to read it, February 2022, Combating Big Tech's Totalitarianism, that's an issue. And that's part of the reason why we named it deliberately totalitarianism, right? Mm-hmm. The politicization of everything. Mm-hmm. If this phone in your pocket is a political weapon wielded by the Chinese Communist Party or Apple or Google or Facebook, then we're not allowed to govern ourselves. We don't have an America. We don't have a country at that point.
Kara, this was absolutely awesome. How can people keep up with everything that you're writing, saying, thinking, talking about? Where can they find all of it?
Yeah, anything, heritage.org, director of tech policy there. So we have a tech page. I'm myself, Kara A. Frederick on Twitter, like Frederick the Great. And I do the Instagram thing too. Sorry, X on, not Twitter. I do the Instagram thing too now. We are slaves again to our overlords, as you talked about, but hopefully something will come around where we can actually be Americans on these platforms again. I think that's pretty much it. So heritage.org though, first and foremost.
Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Hopefully you enjoyed that. We certainly enjoyed taping it. As always, be sure to go to AmericanMoment.org. There you can find applications for our upcoming programs, whether it's the Fellowship for American Statecraft, or you can fill out the interest form for our summer lunches on Capitol Hill. I said summer. There's summer, spring, and fall now, so you can come to lunch right now, this Friday, if you would so like. Not this Friday, because this episode coming out on the Monday of Thanksgiving week, but the point is, chances are, if you are in Washington, D.C., almost every single week of the year, there is now an American Moment program that's highly relevant to you. Go check it out on AmericanMoment.org. There you can find the backlog of this podcast and everything else we have cooking at American Moment. Be sure to rate and review this podcast. 5 stars only. Otherwise, Santa Claus will bring you a dead animal on Christmas. There you can also subscribe on YouTube. Look at our pretty mugs and the pretty mugs of our guests as we have these fantastic discussions. Our YouTube subscribership has exploded recently. It's like doubled this year alone. And as always, we are very grateful for having you guys on the show. Nick, you want to interrupt me?
People are going to think that they accidentally turned on the 2x speed.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like Chippy. I'm so glad to be back on the podcast after so many weeks. I need to just, start taping on the weekends or something. Our producers will kill us if I ask. But thank you guys, as always, for listening to the show. We really appreciate it. We appreciate the overwhelming well wishes that have come over these big announcements these last few weeks. We are more excited than ever to be doing our work here at American Moment. So thank you, and we'll see you guys next week. Moment of Truth is an American Moment Studios production filmed at the Conservative Partnership Center. Our podcast is produced and edited by Jake Mercier and Jared Cummings. Our intro music is A Minor Struggle by Ryan Serenich. Don't forget to like and subscribe on all platforms, and you can go to AmericanMoment.org to learn more.